And there are a number of parables that talk about that, emphasize that idea of something, happiness that we haven't planned for. So like the mustard seed, the sower in the field, the lost coin, the lost sheep. If you take all the parables of Jesus and try to put them in one of these three categories, finding, selling, buying, the smallest group of parables fit into this category, finding. However, what I would say, that does not represent the historical Jesus. Why? The parables that speak of finding were vital, ruddy-faced, proud parables. They were expression of the intrusion of God's coming, that God was actually present in the ministry of Jesus. The parables that emphasized that were so necessary in the pre-Paschal community. But all of a sudden, in the light of Easter morning, those parables that emphasis turned pale and humbled themselves before the experience of the resurrection in the post-Paschal community. With the unexpected joy of finding the empty tomb, those parables of finding fell into the background. The dazzling truth of the resurrection made those parables pale in significance. But nonetheless, the church remembered them. Second aspect. So you understand what finding means? Something happens to us, God invades our life, some new possibility. Selling. What does selling mean? In the parable, it means the reversal, a willing abandonment of all that one has held on to. It's total reversal, the changing of orientation. North becomes south, south becomes north. There's an inversion of values. What we thought was so important, we sell out on that and we give up on it. It is the process, selling in the parable means the process of overturning our world and leaves us standing with uncertainty. The future that we've always been planning for has now changed, and we have to let it go. It is the willing abandonment of what we had. So the rich man and Lazarus, Pharisee and the publican, all of those fit into that category. All these parables of selling out, or the idea of selling, challenges the complacency of the way we look at things. Okay? They overturn, all of a sudden, when we're faced with the intrusion of the accepting God's grace in our life, our standards of good and evil, of love and hate, of life and death, all of these change. Okay, reversal. Now the last thing is to buy. After reversing, after shifting the direction of one's orientation, after reversing one's vision, one's imagination, one's heart, because something new has been found or invaded in our life, only then is there the possibility of good decisions, of a new intention, of a good deed. Jesus' parables challenge us always to a new life, to a new action within the kingdom, but interesting enough, they always leave that action unspecified in detail. The emphasis always falls on firm, resolute action, prompt, energetic response, but what it is, we're not told. Why? Get back to the context of Jesus' day. How can Jesus call us absolutely to action and be so unspecific in spelling it out? Jesus is speaking at a particular time when the Pharisees had tremendous power as moral guides, and they were teaching that obedience leads to God. But Jesus challenges his contemporaries with the exact opposite. Obedience does not lead to God. His point is God leads us to obedience. It's God's presence in our life, the finding, that makes a good life possible. It's not a good life that ensures the presence of God. Paul would put this in abstract language when he talks about justification by faith. But Jesus does this much more concretely. He announces the kingdom with its demands for a decision and action, but leaves that action for hearers. He leaves his hearers more struck by what God is doing for them and their need to respond than what they are doing for God. Perhaps this is the most unsettling aspect of the parables. They draw us into the kingdom. They make us experience it. Yet they leave us unsure of what to do. We pine for programs and precepts. We prefer not to hear the pregnant silences of the parables or the pregnant silences of God's presence in our life. We would like just one little absolute, something even pale and anemic that we can hang our life onto, but Jesus refuses. He only offers us a glimpse that the kingdom of God is snapping away all our absolutes like dried twigs. Okay, so he finds, he sells, he buys. This is a very simple, ordinary sequence, yet beneath it there is something startling being said. The parable shatters the normalcy of existence, past, present, and future. The future which we have been living for and planned for and projected yesterday is invalidated. Now something new has happened in the present. Familiar beliefs, former ideas come to a bursting point with new meaning. Life suddenly releases unspent force. Conventional expectations and interpretations are filled with a flood of new insight. We have a totally new future. And so the structure of these two twin parables really is disclosing the sovereign freedom of God. Geographers, and I'm going to conclude with this. Okay. Geographers tell us that we do not live on terra firma, on firm land, but on giant moving plates whose grinding passages and tortured depths give us earthquakes and volcanoes. Jesus tells us in these twin parables that we do not live in firm time, but in giant shifting moments whose movement is causing the eschatological advent of God, whose transitions and changes are the coming of God in our life. I would say if we wish to experience in God like Jesus did, let the parable that we have looked at be our paradigm for living. Find God in the people and places and the loss and gains of everyday life. Receive God where he is. Then secondly, after finding him, we must be ever prompt to let go, to sell out, to change our attitudes, our ideas. We must let his presence in nature and in human nature fill our minds and hearts and reverse our direction from self-interest to self-sacrifice, from our thoughts to his thoughts. And then, and only then, can we do anything for God. For the Christian life is always a response to God who loves us first.